That was great. Thank you for that. I do have a couple of questions for
Sure.
you. One, I was just wondering if you can talk a bit more about your experiences at Bikini Atoll. What was it like to experience all that?
Well, let's see. What was it like? I would say it was better than living in a cave. Uh, we lived in very nice tents. There was a manager for um, the tent community, and I believe during the times that I was out there, it was Holmes and Narver, and they did a good job, as far as I can tell. Uh, Especially their bakery people. They made the best bread I've ever had. And I remember thinking if I could make bread half this good, I would be satisfied. And so when I got home, I tried to make bread at least half as good. And I can't say that I succeeded. But they were very, they knew how to run a camp so that you could have unlimited steaks, unlimited ice cream, unlimited almost anything that you might ever want. And so when I first went out during Red Wing, uh, we lived in a tent camp on the island of Urochi, I believe, waiting for a shot called Cherokee to go. And there's another story involved in Cherokee. We tried 4 times before we finally got it off. The concern was the weather pattern, and everyone was worried about another lucky dragon. The Japanese fisher boat that got caught up in that. So did our own people, but they take showers. The poor guys on the Japanese fishing boat had no idea that there was anything happening that they should be aware of. That was very sad. But once we fired the Cherokee weapon, there was enough fallout so that we couldn't live on the island anymore. So we lived on an imp boat. Now that is an experience. Um, an M boat, I think it was formally called a landing craft utility. It doesn't have a keel. And so every motion possible on water is allowed. And so it not only did this, it also did that. And if you've seen some of the pictures made, movies made in the 30s, where people were on ocean liners, then the tipping of the ship would make their meal slide down to one end of the table and then slide back. And while we didn't, let's see, we must have eaten something aboard ship, but when you were working on building something, you had a soldering iron, you're working, and if you were sailing across a lagoon, and the landing craft was doing something like that, you would sit there with a soldering iron, and this piece of work would slide over there, and then it would slide back and quickly solder something. That was exciting. And we slept in I don't know what to call it, a cabin? It wasn't really a cabin. It was just a room that was a steel room on top of which outside was bolted the diesel generator that supplied electricity for the ship. And I never thought I would ever be able to sleep. But you get used to it. And so we ran the latter part of that operation from these LCUs. either at Bikini or back at Eniwetok, where we had a lot of smaller tests. I would take basically an M boat. An M boat is just it's a smaller version. The front end just drops down to disembark people and equipment. And sailing across a choppy lagoon was quite an experience. And then I would land at Engebi, which is an island on the north end of Eniwetok Atoll. And it's a bigger island than most. And the devices we were testing were on barges that were firmly tied down to the coral in the lagoon. But to get around the island, I was supposed to have a Jeep, but there was no ignition keys for these vehicles. And so anyone who wanted to drive to the other end of the island would take this Jeep. And I did a lot of walking as a result. And I remember the arming and firing team, when they would come aboard the barge to do the last minute connections, took some pictures of me. And I had grown a beard. I was practically black from suntan. And I had a pair of long pants that I'd cut short with all the strings hanging down. And later I was called in by the test director, who said, "Here's a copy of that picture. We want you to know that we use this picture for new people. When they first come, we said, don't let this happen to you." And so I was what would you call it? An example of what not to let happen to oneself.
The poster boy.
The poster boy. The poster boy for how not to live in a tropical island. But I must say we worked pretty hard. It was basically day and night. I remember we would start out of the day, and Charlie Fenstermacher and I would go out to the bunker on Engebi. We would take about a half dozen oranges with us, and that was our food for the day. And then we'd come back in the evening, and we'd have a regular meal at the base island. I forget what that was at Bikini. Eniwetok, it was Perry Island. Anyway, so basically life on one of these operations was devoid of most of the social amenities. For example, there were no women on the island, and the men would basically discard their clothes and walk. There were a few that walked around with no clothes on whatsoever. I often wondered what would make them do that. But it was, you're there with a bunch of other people. There was always a lot of humor. And you had two-way radios. Every location had a two-way radio. And you would just say, you would pick up the microphone and squeeze the button, and you would say, John Malick, come in, please." And if he were within hearing distance, he would respond. And that's how we didn't have cell phones, of course, but that's how you communicated in those days. It worked fairly well. I remember back in those early days when I was still a rebel, I was angry because my badge didn't say official photographer. And in those days, you recorded data with cameras. You have oscilloscopes, you have cameras, you would get them all primed and ready to go, and then at the right time, the shutters would open automatically, and then the device would go off and you would record data. Then you had to go back in to these bunkers and open the door, which was, must have weighed 20 tons, full of lead or concrete or something, whatever. And you pushed the slide of the film cassette down. You took them out of the camera, put them in a lead box, and you came in by helicopter, land on the roof, and you come down a ladder and you do all this. Then you go out, close this door, and climb the ladder, get into the helicopter, and fly away. And that's how we did things back then. It's amusing to think of how much has changed in the way that you could do it. On the first shot, I was angry, as I said, because I wasn't an official photographer. So I said to myself, I will show those guys. I will find a rule that is sacrosanct, and I'm going to break that rule. And so I took a cardboard coffee cup and sprayed it all black. And I cut a hole in the bottom and glued a piece of aluminum foil on it in which I had punched the right size hole. And then I used epoxy to glue a film cassette on the back. So when we were aboard ship waiting for the device to go off about 25 or 30 miles away, I was up on deck. I would put my hand over the front so no light could get in. And then when they were at about H minus 15 seconds, I would pull up the slide on the cassette, and I would wait until I saw the flash of light, and I would turn in that direction, and I would do this. And then we developed the film. And it showed evidence of a rising fireball. And a little while later, here comes the voice of the test director calling my mentor, who was Major Roger Ray. And he said, Major Ray, we understand that you have a photograph of the event. And I thought, well, there goes that job, and I've only been hired for a month, and I'm doomed. And Major Ray said, yes, we do. And the test director said, get over here immediately with that film. And Major Ray said, just remain calm. I'll take care of all of this. And so it turns out that this was an airdrop, and there was an error made of some kind in the actual drop. They fly over, get weather conditions, turn around and come again, and then they drop it. Something went wrong, and this thing was dropped miles off the target. And so none of the professional cameras got a picture of the detonation. Mine was the only one. And so they used that to triangulate and get lines of sight. And here I thought I was doomed, and I was a rebel. And sometimes rebels don't become martyrs. Not always. But it was a very What kind of life? How would I describe life in a Weetalkin bikini? People would discard the veneers of civilization. They were there for a purpose, and they were pretty good at focusing on the reason they were there. But all the amenities, all the little things that you'd expect in a normal society, just people just ignored because it just wasn't relevant. To me, the morale was very high. People knew what they were doing. Everyone got along pretty well. To my knowledge, I recall no occasions where, well, I don't know what to call it, where the isolation of being on an island in a very abnormal situation didn't seem to really affect people very much. If there had been women there, it probably would have been a little more exciting, but there weren't.